here with a phenomenal artist, and I would like for her to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself and her name.
Hi, my name is Januwa Nelson. I'm a textile artist, a mixed media artist, a cultural arts activist is what my work is about. And Januwa was a name that I took on, or that was given to me over about 50 years now, over 50 years actually. But I saw that I needed to change my name legally, and I did that in the or I should say the late 70s, just before we got married in 79. So along with that. Why I felt the necessity to do that, because we were doing that at that time and now relating to African culture going back. Remember, if anybody grew up in the 60s or the late 50s, we were into whatever was offered us from these regular stores, like the Learner Shop. I don't know if anybody remembers the Learner Shop or Sears Roebuck or what have you. That is what we were offered. And I'm glad I began to try to think outside the box as we begin to relate to African culture. And I feel like I came from the first generation to do so, or maybe the second generation, because Nina Simone was one of my, inspirations. Abby Lincoln. And Abby had an African name. And of course, Nina and her music was very much a part of my consciousness. Again, where we end up at is we are who we are, and if we want to embrace ourselves in a cultural manner, we begin to do so. So I wasn't by myself. I had a whole group of people that would float along with this mindset that we accept who we are, we live who we are, and we embrace our culture.
Along with your consciousness of naming, did you also find it of interest to look at other aspects of African history in order to implement or to change the way people perceive their clothing?
You had to study. So, I studied African art, I studied African American history, I studied. So it wasn't just something if you looked in our library in the hallway, you would see over 100 books just about us. That's all I was ever interested in. Remember, I came up and so the Uzikee in a time where, whatever was given in a textbook was the truth. Whatever was written in a Eurocentric book was the truth in the way we went. So my work was very radical and very different in terms of relating to that. And I wasn't by myself. In Baltimore, we had like the Timbuktu Educational Center. That place where people who, again, taught the community to embrace our history, our art, and our culture. And that's when my first sewing class, where I taught sewing at the Timbuktu Educational Center. We had the Soul School, which is, again, another institution. Here in DC, we have a very phenomenal school called Ujamaa, which is the oldest Afrocentric school in the country. They are on their 56th year of just teaching young people, because we understand you can't always get somebody when they're grown to show them. You have to bring children along. So that school has been in reality for over about 56 years, and hundreds of students have been through there, where they're taught to embrace their culture and learn from a cultural perspective.
As you were going through all of this training and this knowledge gathering, did you find something that automatically hooked you, or you got an aha moment every so often that made you want to go, ah, and you take a deep breath and then you go, ah, I want to translate that feeling into the clothing that I'm creating.
Absolutely, because I found out we were the beginning. I mean, so let's start with the so-called, I call it Kemet or Kemet, but the name is Egypt. And those various dynasties were black dynasties. Again, how they turned things around and made you think that that was not Africa, or Egypt is not in Africa, you know. So that was the first, begin to look at the beauty that was created from that culture. Then you look at the Moors of Spain. The Moors is another great dynasty of black people that really jump-started brought civilization to Europe while they were living in more or less, I don't know how they were doing, but when the Moors came, they brought mathematics, science, spirituality. They brought so much to that culture. And now you're dealing with the erasures of what black people have done here, as well as worldwide. So again, it's always an act of resistance for me. And I take that on with great pride and strength. I'll do that with my last breath. Resist what's being done.
This resisting that you found yourself involved in, and the way that you are educating others around you about the resistance and about the knowledge that they should be aware of.
Exactly.
How did you funnel that information into your sculptural pieces of your head wraps, your hair dress, and all of that? And let me show you all a picture of one of the phenomenal pieces that she is known for. Can you tell us about this?
Well, this piece is a feathered headpiece, which is created with the inspiration from Africa, but also the Native American culture here. So again, how we started various cultures. The jewelry I created, which is like 5 rows of beads and various patchwork on the garment, more or less bringing color, and what she represents that pieces, and she's called the Queen of Spades. That's what I call the whole piece. Remember, some terms were used as derogatory terms when they call you black as the ace of spade. You have anybody ever heard that one? Well, she's embracing the spade concept. She's the Queen of Spades. So again, embracing who we are. I love being a black person, and a black person in this country, a black person that can travel the world. And I'm so honored to have taken my work to, Brazil. I've done 2 shows in Bahia, Brazil. I've done 2 shows in Havana, Cuba. I've done a show in London, England, and as well as around here. But all of them are based from African inspiration and African culture, and reinterpreted to the culture to now, you know. So it's not trying to do something specifically created from Africa, but to take it to another level, which, if you heard the term Afrofuturism, beginning to see ourselves in the future as well. So that's where that we come along with.
And speaking of Afrofuturism, have you seen that at the National Museum of African American History?
I did not, but
yes, they have a whole section there on Afrofuturism.
I know well about
and they do a lot with the Black Panther and some other things. So
I know so well about it, but I didn't go to the museum because I studied it. I've already done that.
It's beautiful.
In fact, the piece that I was telling you about, Sun Ra, which is a show that I did in Cuba, was based. Sun Ra was known as the father of Afrofuturism. So his music, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the video.
The name of one of the shows that I remember seeing of yours at the Smithsonian was Sun Ra, I think. That was in the late late 80s, I saw one of your shows, and it featured all different kind of clothing designs that had been inspired by you, and at the end it culminated with you on a chair with this beautiful outfit. I don't know if you remember this show.
I did that for years. Go ahead. It was one of these chairs. It was that chair in the back of us. Anyway.
Yeah, and that was the most memorable show because it allowed you to actually envision what could be.
Absolutely.
And speaking of what could be, what's next on your agenda for the next Januwa up? What is going to be the next?
Well, that's when I started to embrace other mediums. I always, like I said, I created jewelry for many years. I have various kind of headpieces and whatever that I've done, but I wanted to go again with pieces on the wall, mixed media, which is clay and glass, mosaic and glass, or wood and glass. The piece behind me that's over the mantle. Pieces like that to express again who we are. I'm never going to stray from that concept. I'll just use, like I said, we have stories to tell, untold stories to tell, and this gives me an opportunity to really release some of the thoughts that I've had and some of the things that I've learned and mold them into art pieces, So I'm looking forward to the future in that realm. I'm no longer sewing. Like I said, I did it for 52 years. I didn't have a workshop. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for me where I could get a group of people behind me and I've even doled out pieces like, you sew this, you sew that, I bring it back and put it together. That never worked out. So I had to do all the sewing and I didn't do a lot of preliminary drawing and what have you. I would get right into the fabric, sew the garment, and visualize, again, about visualization, how to put a show together. That concept of the fashion show, the kinds that I did, was to be number one, sing ourselves, other than, remember the Ebony fashion show, where Eunice, I studied again, which was the woman who headed up those shows, would go to Europe and buy European garments, come back and put them on black models, and the black models would act like European models on stage. I tried to do the opposite of that. So I was creating my own designs, go to Africa or wherever they had African prints. I was the first one to break outside that box and wanted to present a different ways. Most of my bottles were women in our community. I didn't look for the model concept. We were various heights, various colors, and only thing I asked is we wear our hair natural. Because at that time, again, we're fighting against the Jerry curl that was put out for us. And that was my own. Let's embrace African hairstyles, African head wraps, or whatever, to show another kind of beauty. Now we're getting to do that, and I'm really grateful that the mindset has opened up, that women really accept who we are in this, being in this space that we're in.
What cities have you traveled to that as you've aged? What cities, like your wife, she mentioned places in Brazil and Cuba. What about you?
I've been to Cuba, Brazil, Mississippi, Tupelo. So I've been all different places that had an influence on me. Not no one,
Okay.
So I had this.
So African travel wise, we went to Morocco. We stayed in Morocco for a month, just traveling around aimlessly, and we had a good time. That was in the early 80s when we did that trip. I went to Egypt, study tour with some of our black historians. I don't know if you heard of Dr. John Hendry Clark, Dr. Ben, Asa Hilliard, Jacob Carruthers. It was a group, I think it was almost 1,000 of us, at least 900 from around the country on that particular trip. It was one of the most memorable experiences that I had in traveling. Other than that, we went to Ghana. We stayed in Ghana for a while. We went to W.E.B. Du Bois Center while we were in Accra. Where else we been? I've been to Nigeria, Senegal. Where else? In Africa. So.
I've been to a lot of places.
At least seven countries in Africa. 4 times. Oh, and then recently I found myself in Palenque. Palenque is in my mind, look, I'm at this age. Oh my God. Palenque is in, where's Priscilla and Alvin?
What?
Our nephew and niece is in Central America. Where's?
Who told you about the NAACP?
I'm not quite sure. You know, I wasn't that old. I didn't know too much about art. About the NAACP at that time.
What was your dad doing at that time?
My father
Your
was
father.
a dentist. He's a dentist. He moved from Tupelo to Peoria originally, but he originally started out as a dentist in Chicago. He was in Chicago, that's where he originally started. And that was during the Depression. So during the Depression, he was dealing with it, and eventually he decided, well, he can't make it here, so he eventually moved from Chicago to Tupelo, and he traded dental work for work done on the people's teeth. He had an office in Tupelo.
Were there other black dentists in?
No, there were no black other dentists that I knew of. It was not a big town, so it wasn't. I didn't know any people that were dentists other than my father.
At some point, how did you meet John Gwynn?
Well, John Gwynn was basically, it seemed like to me he missed the civil rights, fighting against racism in all forms of it. Racism from Caterpillar Day down to everything else. Racism was racism. But it wasn't that bad in Tupelo in comparison. Tupelo was a good town. The police wasn't beating up black people, shooting them or nothing. So it was a weird town. And the biggest thing in the town was the education. In Tupelo, they had a school there called Carver High. Carver High, when I went to Carver High from the first grade, and then I finished to the second grade. I moved from Battle Creek, Michigan. And my mother, all of our kids were in Battle Creek, Michigan. I stayed there 1 year. Then I moved back to Tupelo.
At some point, you went to Peoria Central, and then
Yes, that's right.
what did you do after that?
I was working with my father, helping fixing his building, fixing his apartment building. They were doing all kinds of stuff to stop black people, to stop racism. They wouldn't allow you on certain blocks. You couldn't live on everything you could think of was racism. They were dealing with it.
Did you go to Bradley?
No, I did not. I'm the only one in the family that didn't go to Bradley. Cause my sister, all her sisters told me at the time, her name is Sarita. That's my sister Sarita went to Bradley, and the rest of them went to Bradley. My brother John, Winona, they went to Bradley. Okay, I didn't.
Why didn't you go to Bradley?
Well, they told me, said, well, look, you won't meet no black people. There's only about 12 people, black people in the whole college. So for some reason, my sister said that wouldn't be a good place because they couldn't play basketball, they couldn't do nothing. Peoria was a closed town, as I was concerned.
So what kind of things was the NAACP and John Gwynn doing during those times?
Fighting racism in all forms of it.
How were they fighting it?
Protesting mostly. I don't know if there was any laws going on, but all protesting. They didn't allow black students to stay on Howard,
Bradley.
They didn't allow black people to play at Bradley at all. And they didn't have no basketball team or nothing like that.
What year was that?
Well,
In the 50s?
in the 50s, early 50s.
Okay.
So they didn't allow black people to do very much at all going on in Peoria. And I didn't know very much because I was, of all my family, they thought at the time I was the dumb one. That's what they told me, I was dumb, because I couldn't spell too well. So that's told me I was a dumb one.
What did you major in? Where did you go? To Southern Illinois?
Yeah, I went to Southern Illinois in Carbondale, Illinois in January 1960.
Uh-huh.
But when I got out of high school, I had to work for a guy named Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott was a pharmacy. I had to work for him. And of course, there was no work for black people in Peoria other than Caterpillar in the foundry.
So was the work that the NAACP was doing, was that beneficial? Was that helping?
I really couldn't tell you, I didn't know, but it wasn't gonna help me, let's say it that way. And so my sister, Nona, she's still around. She had to go to Cleveland, Ohio to take a job as a telephone operator. That's when they had telephones operators. She had to go there. Because there's no work was for black people at Peoria, was maybe maids or something like that.
Well,
But no school teachers. No school teachers. They didn't allow black people to teach school in Peoria at all, zero. But my grandmother on my father's mother, she was a school teacher in Tennessee, around Nashville, Tennessee.
let me ask you, how would you describe John Gwynn's leadership?
Well, he was the only leadership that I knew of at all, except a few guys up the. But the weirdest thing, they had one black teacher or so up at Bradley. But it was kind of weird. One teacher.
At some point, the NAACP put one of your sculptures in front of their building. Can you tell me about that?
Okay. I decided that I would put one of my pieces in front of their building after I'd taken some courses in college in Southern Illinois. Then I decided, well, I'll put something up. And I told you I should have a picture of the piece I put up in Peoria. It was about 12 feet tall. is a piece of African orientated. That's the only thing I did, African orientated art.
Did you want to put it up, or someone else asked you to put it up, or?
No, I didn't want. I was the one they never even thought about doing nothing like that.
Okay. How would you describe your art?
Afrocentric.
Afrocentric.
I have I have pictures I was trying to show you earlier. My pictures were Afrocentric. Cause in college, that's where I learned the Afrocentric stuff. But I learned mechanically how to do things like carpentry, masonry, and a little. That was what I could do at Carver High.
Okay.
In Tupelo. Tupelo was a school known for education for blacks.
At what point or what year did you leave Peoria, and where did you go?
When I left Peoria in '55, right after I'd gone to, they had got in the Boy Scouts, okay? And got in the Boy Scouts. And I left Peoria after going out west, because they had a thing desegregating the Boy Scouts. So I left in '55, went out to Mexico, and then the other place I went with like 30 black boys going to a jamboree out in Texas and Arizona, out that way, like that.
Okay. And one last question: how, in terms of personality, how would you describe John Gwynn? Or
John Gwynn was the guy that spoke for us. He the one that had to speak for us, because I don't think they had a lawyer in town. If they did, I never heard of one. But I don't know now. I couldn't tell you, because I was just a little boy, you know. Like I was there when I was in the first grade. Now I'll try to tell you again. In the first grade, I started at Carver. That's the name of the school, George Washington Carver. That was the only school in town. And it was a very modern school, brick building. I never heard of the NAACP when I was a little boy. No, I never heard anything about it.
was John Gwynn a quiet man, or was he?
No, he was always trying to talk, and help protest and stuff was going on in Peoria.
Okay. And what is your name again?
Alan.
Your full name?
Alan Nelson. And
Okay.
I adopted the name Uzikee. After going to college, that's why I adopted the name Nelson.